A relatively new Penske tradition lives on, and were the concerns at the beginning of the week heading into Iowa Speedway's race weekend relevant when it was all said and done? Let's chat about it. Hey everyone, welcome back to Above the Yellow Line. My name's Taylor Kitchen, and here we do motorsports media your way, talking about NASCAR literally all the time. And today we're talking about Iowa, the NASCAR Cup Series first race on the track. And it did not disappoint. It was a wild one. As we were going through the motions of the race, you were like, oh, Hendrick Motorsports is probably going to win this, from Kyle Larson having a strong car, William Byron having a strong car, Chase Elliott doing really well. Alex Bowman at some point or another was in the top 10. He could have done it. Maybe. Who knows? But one driver said, hold my beer, leading 201 laps, putting on a clinic, winning in front of over 80 family and friends. Ryan Blaney wins the inaugural race at Iowa Speedway. Ryan found success at this track. He got his first Truck Series win at the track. He was really good at this track in the Xfinity Series, so it's not really a surprise that it carried over to Truck. The one thing that concerned me with this race is his crew chief, Jonathan Hassler, during one of the last pit stops of the race, called for a two-tire stop. There were only a few drivers that made this call, and I was very concerned because through the evening and through the start of the race, we saw that a two-tire call wasn't ultimately the best. You had to have a four-tire stop if you wanted to make any ground or keep your track position. But I think at the end of the day, with how many laps they had remaining and the sun going down and the track cooling off, that two-tire call was worth the risk, and it ultimately had Ryan Blaney winning the race, able to keep his track position. I also think that lap traffic played a huge factor into this in keeping William Byron, who finished in that second position, behind him. Byron, after the race, said he was making really good strides in turns 1 and 2, and then his tires would just get too hot and too slick and he would lose some of what he gained. Something else that we'll talk about later in the show is what he said about tires. He said that it was really odd. It took like 1 to 2 laps for those tires to really work in and get the grip that he needed. So he struggled on the restarts. And that's not something that was just strictly contingent to William Byron. Other drivers also vocalized the same concern. Again, we'll talk about it later. But something interesting with the tires this weekend. So if we're going to keep track here, of course, Ford had a tough start to the season, but now they have 3 total wins. We have Brad Keselowski at Darlington. We have Austin Cindric at Gateway. And of course, it could have been Ryan Blaney. He ran out of fuel, but Blaney now redeems himself this weekend at Iowa. And if you're going to keep track, the only Penske driver to not win a race this season, at least I should say a points-paying race, is veteran driver Joey Logano. But coming up this weekend, we have New Hampshire, a track that he's generally really, really good at. So could this be the weekend where he's able to get the win and keep up with his teammates? I would hope so, because right now he's below that cutoff line and the points races are dwindling down before we hit the playoffs. So, of course, first place Ryan Blaney, second William Byron, third Chase Elliott. And during the broadcast, they talked about Alan Gustafson and how he spoke to the media and how he compared the run that Elliott is having this season to his 2020 championship season. No doubt, Chase Elliott and that 9 team are firing on all cylinders. They are incredibly consistent this season, and this is statistically one of the best seasons in the Cup Series Chase Elliott has ever had. With that said, Elliott now leads the regular season championship by 8 points over Kyle Larson. Larson did have some issues we're going to talk about during today's race at Iowa. But yeah, Chase Elliott now in the lead for that regular season championship. In fourth place with quite the rally, we have Christopher Bell with his 4th straight top 10. And this weekend, getting that top 10 finish in a backup car, which is very impressive. Going into this weekend, we know that he was one of the more vocal drivers about the product that this track was going to put on, loving the old surface and seeing the botched repave. Some just calling it a really weird repave. But Christopher Bell was very adamant on saying that, hey, this is going to be like a one-groove racetrack. This is really weird. They're ruining the corners, etc. We talked about this in the video we did pre-race that came out on Thursday, talking about the driver comments heading into this weekend, the concerns that were being spilled out into the open. After the race, though, they asked Christopher Bell, what did you think of the race? What would you suggest NASCAR do? After the race, he shared that NASCAR should definitely fully repave the corners. If anything, if they don't want to pave the straightaways, that's fine, but at least repave the corners if they can. But ultimately, he still is kind of siding with his old opinion of saying, hey, if we raced on the old surface, it would have been a barn burner, and I don't doubt that at all. In fifth place, this should not be a surprise, but it also kind of came as a shock as well. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., this is his second top 5 of the season. We know he has had great success at this track in the Xfinity Series, got his first Xfinity Series win at the track as well. It's also really cool to see the trophy in RFK's shop. If you haven't been able to visit their shop and their museum that they have in the shop, go see it. They have this trophy on display. But really excellent finish for him. It's been a back and forth season for that 47 team, so awesome to see them get a top 5. Sixth place, Joey Logano, again, like I mentioned, with his team success this year with Cindric and Blaney getting a win. Getting the sixth place finish for Logano is great, but he wants to be better than that, so hopeful to get a win, if anything, next week at New Hampshire. In that 7th position, leading 32 laps, we have Josh Berry, a very good run for that team. The past 2 weekends, they've been finishing outside the top 30, so this is very refreshing for that team. And typically where they have been running this season, they've been running very, very well. A lot of us thought at one point or another during this race, Josh Berry could have potentially been a winner. Obviously, we know that Blaney and Larson and Bell and all of them had stronger cars than his at the end of the day. But it's also hard to forget how well he ran. And I think about that battle between him and Buescher during one of the restarts. And it was really exciting. And you could tell that his car could really hold its own. At some point this season, I'm not losing hope that a Stewart-Haas racing car is going to win a race. I think it's either going to be him or Noah Gragson. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Chase Briscoe, but one of them's going to win a race and potentially before the playoffs hit, lock themselves into the playoffs and hopefully send SHR off on a high note. But a really good day for that Ford team. In 8th place is Alex Bowman. He had a really bad qualifying effort, but of course rectified it during this race. He got caught in that weird strategy of just a funky caution that left some cars a lap down. Did not play into his favor, but again was able to rally for a top 10 finish. 9th, Daniel Suarez. This is his first top 10 since Texas, and the best I have seen that car run, quite frankly, all season long. Obviously, yes, he won Atlanta. He's locked into the playoffs. We've seen that success there for him, but consistently for that team, he was in the top 10 practically all day long during this Iowa race. So very good. I'd like to see that more consistently from the 99 team. Do I think we can? I don't know, but this is a good starting point. And then, of course, in that 10th position, we have Brad Keselowski. We all know that Brad's really good at Iowa Speedway. He was vocal on being positive going into this weekend, saying, hey, I think we're going to see some of the old style of racing that we had at this track with the old surface. I feel the repave is generally good. So Mr. Positivity going into this weekend, which we all appreciate, finishing inside the top 10. Those were your drivers inside the top 10. Now let's look outside the top 10 for positive or negative reasons. Let's start with the negative. I like to end on positives typically. So for Kyle Larson, probably had the car to beat Sunday. Truly, I think he did. And the only way he was going to lose the race, in my opinion, though, Ryan Blaney had a fantastic car. Christopher Bell's car was great on the long run. The only way he was going to lose the race, though, was if something crazy happened. And something crazy did happen. And he finished this race many laps down. Around lap 221, Larson was put 3 wide in a situation with Daniel Suarez and Brad Keselowski. Suarez ended up going up the track and into the rear of the number 5, causing Larson to spin. He ended up clipping the 11 that was behind him. Damage to some of the cars. Larson went to pit road, and then he incurred a 2-lap penalty for too many men over the wall. The car suffered suspension issues, which again, they were able to fix at least enough to get him back on track, met minimum speed, and was able to finish the race. But again, many laps down, ruining what could have been a race-winning day for that 5 team. We've talked about this driver for the past few weeks for negative reasons, and I hate to keep dogging on it, but we're going to. Kyle Busch, with his second DNF of the season, was running inside the top 10 practically all race long, and then just had something break in the rear of the car. According to Randall Burnett, his crew chief, he says the serpentine belt broke and the rear lower control arm just fell off. So poor day for that 18 when it's all said and done. He's now 31 points below that playoff cut line. It's going to be a grueling fight to get that team into the playoffs. At this point, you're going to be thinking you're going to need a win. Let's end on a positive. Let's mention drivers that had fantastic days that I think deserve a good mention. Starting with Harrison Burton. Typically, he hasn't been doing so hot this season, but this race, he ran inside the top 15, top 20, finished in that 20th position, so a really good job for him. Justin Haley, yet again, fantastic run for that team. I know typically we don't expect a whole lot out of the RWR equipment, but again, and I will stress this so many times. Justin Haley elevates the equipment he's in, regardless of what team he's at. He elevates, and he's showing that week after week after week. Racing inside the top 10 practically all race, unfortunately, didn't finish the race that way, though. He finished this race in the 13th position, and even then, talking about his stage 1, he had a pit road penalty, had to go to the back of the pack, and then was able to race his way back through it. That says something about this track and the product that we got, because typically when a driver has something like that happen at a short track in particular, their day is done. They can barely work their way through the field unless you're Kyle Larson, because Kyle Larson and that team they're magic over there. I don't understand it, but somehow, some way, a penalty for that team means nothing. But for a team like Justin Haley, that's kind of a death sentence to their day in the most part. But the fact that they were able to go from the back of the pack to the front, very impressive. With that said, that goes into the race rating, talking about the product of not only the race, but let's talk about the broadcast real quick. NBC is back. I am thrilled. I am thrilled to have NBC back. It is a stark difference between Fox and NBC. Not meaning that in a negative way, it's just they put on their broadcast very differently from each other. And with Dale Jr. not in the booth, I could tell there was a lack of Dale Jr. and I felt it. However, the camaraderie and just the chemistry between Rick Allen, Steve Letarte, Jeff Burton was incredible. And it didn't feel like they were overpowering one another. It didn't feel like there was too many cooks in the kitchen, which sometimes I feel like NBC can feel like regarding their booth. And not necessarily that that's a negative thing, but sometimes it can overpower the track action. That booth pairing did not when it was just the three of them. So I really appreciated that. Really cool to see them highlighting the pit crews just like Fox did, NBC is doing, but in a different way. They're highlighting 2 pit crews or maybe 1 pit crew during a race, and they're having the pit reporters sit on the pit boxes and featuring them during stage 2 for the most part, which I thought was fantastic. So a different way of storytelling, but also again, focusing on those pit crews. But the sound blend was gorgeous during this broadcast. Even then, I focused on when Kim Kuhn was talking and she was saying, do you see these tires? NBC might have cut back to Kyle Larson's car at one point, but when Kim Kuhn said, do you see these tires? They cut right back to the tires. And that's just production paying attention to what their broadcasters, what their pit reporters are saying and trying to show that visual story. Everyone, you could tell, was working together very well. We had 3 different cameras on the screen at one point, which was fantastic. A lot of side-by-side breaks. Overall, refreshing, beautiful, wonderful. Love that NBC is back, and it was a great broadcast from start, from pre-race. That was a smooth pre-race to the end with the post-race show, and my God, I love myself a good post-race show. I am so glad we have those back because, again, a lot of the insight that we get comes from the post-race shows, and when we're not able to get those, that sucks, and we're waiting throughout the week to learn what we should be knowing 30 minutes after the race itself. So, again, props to NBC. Thank God you're back. I'm very excited. Phenomenal job. I'll get off my soapbox with NBC right now. Let's talk about the actual product of the race. The concerns going into this weekend, there were 2. Tires and repave. Let's start with the repave because I made a video about it on Thursday compiling the driver opinions from Ryan Blaney, Christopher Bell, Brad Keselowski, even then the opinion of NASCAR and what they expected going into the weekend. And Elton Sawyer said that they still expect multi-groove racing, and that's exactly what we got. Drivers weren't afraid to be gutsy from the Xfinity Series to the Cup Series, taking racing 3 or 4 wide. And yes, we did see some spins come out of just having a lack of grip from that old surface, but overall, the issues were very minimal, and we did get to see that kind of sweet racing that we used to see at Iowa Speedway, where it was just kind of chaos, all hell breaks loose. You can race anywhere you want on the track. And it was really pleasant to see. And yes, so the drivers could use most of the track. They stuck to that repaved surface in the corners, which created quite a fun event on those restarts, trying to see those drivers just try to squeeze as tightly as they could on that new surface to take up as much as they could, trying not to get thrown to the back of the pack by being on that old pavement. I mentioned the battles earlier between Blaney and Larson and Buescher and Berry being very entertaining on those restarts. Nobody able to really get away from one another, and passing just even from the back of the pack again to the front of the pack wasn't a huge issue. And with this being debated as an intermediate track or a short track or whatever it is, it's a short track. That's my thought. It's a short track. It was very impressive. And it makes me think it's what can we bring from this track forward to our other short tracks on the schedule, like Bristol, Martinsville, Richmond? And part of me thinks it has to do with the tires. We've seen when Goodyear brings a softer tire and they're not afraid to play with that, we see a better racing product. Take Bristol, for example. I think the tire compound was probably too soft. It caused a lot of issues. But that was a good kind of tell that, okay, maybe the save for these short tracks is in the tire that we're bringing. If we can't mess with the horsepower or anything else, the solution is the tires. And I think whatever Goodyear brought to the track this weekend was really, really good. It was solid. I will say the only thing I really didn't like about this race was that weird caution they threw for Daniel Hemrick around lap like 181, 182, where he lost a tire, essentially, or a tire blew, he hit the wall, and NASCAR threw the caution. We'd seen things like that throughout the entirety of the race up to that point where there was no caution thrown, and I will give NASCAR props. Up to that point, they were surprisingly modest with the cautions that they were and weren't throwing, and that's a very good thing. This one was odd. It came at a weird time during the race where we had green flag pit stops, and it kind of flipped the race on its head slightly. At the end of the day, I don't think it mattered that much, but it messed things up enough to where I was like, man, like why then? Why throw the caution then when we didn't have a caution for the same thing laps ago? But I digress. Like I said, ultimately at the end of the day, I don't think it mattered that much with who finished inside the top 10 and things like that. So overall, a very entertaining race. My opinion, the best short track of the season outside of the Bristol race. I love that one. And I gave the Bristol race an 89%. I'm going to give this one a 90. Ooh, do I dare do a 93? I'm going to do 93%, which is definitely above the yellow line. I might be crazy for giving it that high of a percentage, but I really did enjoy this race, and it was a very pleasant surprise from the short track racing we have seen with this Gen 7 car so far. What were your thoughts of the first race at Iowa for the NASCAR Cup Series? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to check us out on social media at _TaylorKitchen_ and at Above the Yellow Line. Make sure to check out our websites too, AboveTheYellowLine.com, and of course for more NASCAR news, TobyChristie.com for news that breaks during the week and more motorsports updates. And also as a side note, our live stream this week is going to be on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to have a guest. So to figure out who that guest is and everything like that, follow us on social media. But this is it for this episode of Above the Yellow Line. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this with your friends and family. Thank you all so much for watching this, and until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.